Hello gamers, Snezhnaya is literally just around the corner. As of recording, it comes out in like a week, which is crazy. And along with the release of Snezhnaya, we are getting the limited 5-star Odette. And so I thought I would make a quick guide for any Odette pullers. So Odette is a cryo off-field DPS with some supportive passives. She is a sword user. She can deal both Stellar Conduct and Stellar Swirl damage, but she can't deal both at the same time. I think how it works is if you have Stellar Conduct and Stellar Swirl on the same team, it prioritizes Stellar Conduct first, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd say the character she functions most similarly to is Columbina, which is why I put Columbina of Snezhnaya on the thumbnail. Whether or not she actually holds up to this title for the entirety of Snezhnaya is yet to be seen, but I'd say her kit is quite similar to Columbina's, just to give you an understanding of like her role. So how does she actually work? Well, pressing your skill summons a dance double that deals Stellar Glimmer damage periodically, and Stellar Glimmer is essentially the catch-all term for anything stellar. So at the moment, it's only Stellar Conduct and Stellar Swirl. Who knows, they might add some more stellar stuff in the future. Right now, Stellar Glimmer only encompasses Stellar Swirl and Stellar Conduct. So once you press your skill, you have an option to press your skill again, which you should basically always do. This is a pretty significant portion of her damage. It'll allow you to perform a dance duet with your double that does a Stellar Glimmer mini nuke. And again, this damage is quite relevant, so you don't really want to skip doing this. Another thing that happens when you press your skill is you gain 4 stacks of a Stellar Glimmer damage bonus, 15% for each stack. So if you have all 4 stacks, that's a 60% Stellar Glimmer damage bonus. But once Odette leaves the field, these stacks are slowly transferred one by one to other party members. So this means that Odette doesn't always keep the stacks. Once she leaves the field, the stacks are slowly transferred to the rest of the party and she loses the stacks. This is where her main supportive capability comes from. Her burst does some cryo damage and gives up to 50% Stellar Glimmer damage bonus, but only to Odette herself at C0. So at C0, Odette, when you press her burst, it does cryo damage. I specify cryo damage because you're not getting that many cryo damage bonuses on this team. You're getting a lot of stellar damage bonuses on this team, but this doesn't count as stellar damage, it's cryo damage. So I just thought that was important to mention. And this 50% Stellar Glimmer damage bonus only is given to Odette. The problem with her burst is that while 50% Stellar Glimmer damage bonus sounds pretty good, the thing is Odette is not going to be like the main carry on your teams most of the time. If you're using her on teams with like Sandrone or you're doing Mizuki, at the absolute most, Odette is doing 30% maybe of the team's damage distribution. Most likely she's probably only doing like 25 to 20. These teams are also very diluted when it comes to stellar damage bonuses. If you have, let's say, Chi-Chi on the team, that's 50% stellar damage bonus right there. If you have Yai C1, that's another 50%. If you're using like Cryo Traveler C6, which we won't have for a while, but when we do, that's another 40%. The new Stellar Glimmer support set gives another 50%. So adding another 50% on top of that to only Odette herself when she's already like quite diluted on it anyways, you can start to see why this loses a lot of value. And so you're probably not going to be using this burst very often, probably just for iframes or whatever, but definitely not something you're building energy recharge for. And here we have some of her important passives. So the Marvelous Splendor stacks. This is one of the points I mentioned before. These are the 4 stacks that you get from pressing your skill. And once you swap off your character, you lose 1 stack per second, with these stacks transferring to the rest of your party members. Another one of her passives is this Stellar Glimmer True Multiplier, giving 1.5% increase to the original damage for every 100 attack after 1000. This caps out at 3000 attack or 30%. And she also shows the location of local specialties in Snezhnaya, which is very important and very big. And here we have some of the talent priorities. Skill levels should be your absolute main priority. Even though she might not be doing the most damage on your team, her damage is still respectable and you still want to build for it. Level 90 is quite good. You're trying to reach an attack threshold with the 3000 attack mentioned before. Getting as much base attack as possible is pretty important for her personal damage, but I wouldn't say it's like absolutely necessary and you need to level her to level 90, but I'd say it's quite good for her personal damage for sure. The burst, like I mentioned before, you're probably not going to be using that often. I'd say you can sort of level it if you want to. The animation is really pretty, so if you want to just use it specifically because the animation looks good, I totally get you. But yeah, it scales the Stellar Glimmer damage bonus given to Odette herself. I think it's 50% at level 10. Not sure what it is at level 1, but more often than not, you'll just be skipping the burst to spend more time on your on-field carries and stuff like that. And now let's talk about a little bit of her vertical. So if you get her C1, her skill mini nuke becomes stronger. This is the dance duet that you perform. That basically becomes stronger, increasing her personal damage. And also the Marvelous Splendor stacks, which is the supportive passive, they transfer to your other characters faster. So instead of losing 1 stack per second and giving it to the rest of your team, you lose 2 stacks per second and give it to the rest of your team. So just means the buff to your team applies quicker and your mini nuke becomes stronger. I'd say it's a pretty good C1, but if you're looking for a good stopping point, the best stopping point by far is her C2. At C2, each Marvelous Splendor stack now each gives 7% attack on top of the 15% Stellar Glimmer damage bonus. And opponents near your dance double, which, you know, is just your skill, they'll have their resistances shred by 20%. And this resistance shred is determined by whatever reaction your team is triggering. If you're doing Stellar Swirl, it's going to be Cryo and Animo shred. And if you're doing Stellar Conduct, it's going to be Electro and Cryo Shred. Again, for my personal recommendation, and for like cost value, I'd say if you're going to vertically invest in Odette, C2 is like kind of your main stopping point. C2 is just the best value for an early stopping point. For C4, it's alright, but it makes your burst a lot more valuable now. Her burst damage bonus now is team-wide, so it gives the 50% Stellar Glimmer damage bonus to your whole team. It also adds some coordinated attacks to the on-fielders, and the C6 gives 25% Stellar Glimmer elevation, which is very good. It gives it to anyone who has a Marvelous Splendor stack, which is, you know, basically the whole team. And also herself, her C6 gives the Marvelous Splendor stacks to herself as well. And it also just adds some more like Odette personal damage. Yeah, it's still a very good C6, but again, I recommend C2 for a good early stopping point. And now we can talk about the artifacts. So your best in slot most likely is 4-piece Heart of the Furnace, which is the new Stellar Glimmer support set. The reason why this is most likely your best in slot instead of the Disenchantment and Deep Shadow, which is the Stellar Conduct DPS set, is because, like I said, Odette's personal damage, while it's respectable, it's probably not going to be the most in the team. And if you're using her in a team with, let's say, Yai C1, which a lot of people have now, you're probably gonna need this set on someone because it's really good. So you're probably going to put the Disenchantment and Deep Shadow set on Yai, and then put Heart of the Furnace on Odette. And, you know, in my opinion, putting Heart of the Furnace on Odette is kind of similar to putting Columbina on Silken Moon Serenade, where it's like, you know, you're going to need to have someone on the set in the team. So even though it might not be the best option and someone else can run the set and it'll technically be better, it's just kind of convenient to always have her on Heart of the Furnace, just so you can count on Odette always having like at least the value of the support set, using the support set in all of the stellar teams. But if you have someone who already is holding Heart of the Furnace and you're using her in a Stellar Conduct team, then this is obviously her next best option, the Disenchantment and Deep Shadow. And then we have the 4-piece Scarlet Proof set, which is the new Stellar Swirl DPS set, which probably shouldn't be used. In fact, I don't know why, but probably it just shouldn't be used at all. In fact, it can't be used. The reason why is because the 4-piece set bonus requires you to actually trigger a Stellar Swirl reaction. The problem is that Odette is a cryo character, and you can't apply Animo to an enemy and then apply cryo to trigger a Stellar Swirl, because you can't make an Animo aura exist on an enemy. You can only do it the other way around. You can only apply cryo to an enemy and then apply Animo to them to then trigger Stellar Swirl. So unless you're fighting an enemy that has an innate animal aura on them, which is, 99.99% of enemies don't have an innate animal aura, this set is not going to work whatsoever on her. So even though she does technically do stellar swirl damage, she just can't use this set because she can't trigger it. Well, I guess you technically could still use the set, but it would just be terrible. And so for your Sands, Goblet, and Circlet, you're looking for attack percent, and crit. You're running attack percent because it just scales everything in Odette's kit. It scales the cryo damage that she does, it scales the stellar conduct damage, it scales the stellar swirl damage, it scales her multipliers. Very similar to Flynn's, where it's like you don't want to be running an Electro Goblet on Flynn's because that's just gonna do nothing. It's gonna buff his like normal attacks or something, which just is nothing. So same thing for Odette, just run attack percent, don't run cryo or anything like that. And I also mentioned here that attack percent substats are more valuable than usual until you hit 3000 attack, which is your attack threshold that increases your stellar glimmer damage multiplier. So while you still are of course looking for crit rate and crit damage as you would on most sub DPSs, don't undervalue attack percent. It's still going to be very good. And now we can talk about her weapons. Her Sig is her best in slot, but keep in mind that everything you see on here is like within single digits of percentages of each other when it comes to team DPS. Because again, Odette is not doing the majority of the damage on her team. And the problem with her Sig is that her Sig is solely focused on increasing her personal damage, which isn't that much to begin with. And so when you're increasing the damage of someone who's not doing that big of a percentage of the damage on the team to begin with, it isn't very good value. So in my opinion, if you're going for vertical, look at the constellations for sure. Do not go for the R1. If you're looking for value, the R1 is really bad, and essentially any other 5-star stat stick, or even just using like Freedom Sworn, any of these options here are basically going to be very similar team DPS results. So yeah, I would avoid her Sig, but it is technically her best in slot for personal damage. Right below that you have other 5-star stat sticks, Lo-Fi, Missplitter, whatever you have, Absolution. They're all basically going to be the next best option, especially if you can find one that has a somewhat decent passive. Freedom Sworn is good if you can trigger the passive. The passive requires you to trigger reactions, and like how I previously mentioned about the Stellar Swirl DPS set not working, in Stellar Swirl teams, Freedom Sworn probably isn't going to work at all because just doing direct Stellar Swirl damage doesn't count as a reaction. You actually have to trigger the reaction, and the difference between Stellar Conduct and Stellar Swirl is that you can only trigger Stellar Swirl if you're doing Animo applying it to cryo, right? Stellar Conduct can work either way, right? You can have an Electro Aura and then do Cryo, or you can do Cryo and do Electro. Stellar Swirl only works one way, and because of this, Odette probably isn't a very good holder of Freedom Sworn. At least she can't make use of the passive. But unless you're fighting an enemy with like an innate aura, and then it works, but like I feel like it's just too niche to actually be useful. And then we have the Traveler Sword. We're still not sure if it can be used on other characters yet. If we can, it has a 5-star stat line, which is pretty similar to other 5-star stat sticks. It's got 608 base attack, 33 crit rate. So even though it's got a completely useless passive that only works on the Traveler, if we are able to equip it on Odette, it's going to be very good and one of your best free-to-play options for sure. I saw somewhere that Aquila Favonia could be used on Odette, and I actually thought it was a pretty good shout since it is a standard banner weapon and some people might have it already. It has a high base attack and has attack percent in the passive, which is pretty nice and makes it pretty good despite it having the physical damage substat, which is completely useless. Just the fact that it has high base attack, 20 attack percent in the passive at R1 is pretty good. So that is definitely something you can consider. The new Snezhnaya craftable, which is called Emberwell, it can be good, but for similar reasons to Freedom Sworn, you might struggle to trigger the passive. I'd say it's probably a lot more reliable in Stellar Conduct teams and basically entirely impossible in Stellar Swirl teams. It also has an EM substat, which isn't amazing, but it's better than, physical damage substat, I guess. It's okay. Basically only usable in Stellar Conduct teams. Now near the bottom here we have the Fontaine craftable, which is Finale of the Deep. This is probably your most reliable free-to-play option. The stats are really good. It just has a bunch of attack stats on it. but the passive does require you to heal Odette if you want to trigger it, so that is something you have to think about when you're doing your team building. And then at the bottom here we have Harbinger of Dawn, which has great crit stats of course, but the low base attack can be rough. If you remember from the previous slides, are trying to reach a 3000 attack threshold to increase the damage she gets from her passive, and it can be hard to reach 3000 attack using Harbinger of Dawn, so that's why it's sort of at the bottom here, but the great crit stats on it sort of make up for that loss. But I personally would probably just recommend either the Fontaine Craftable or the Traveler Sword if you can equip it for your free-to-play options. Now we can talk about her teams. When it comes to stellar teams in general, basically any stellar team, Odette is kind of the best in slot in all of them. One of the teams I'm looking forward to the most is Stellar Swirl with Mizuki, Cryo MC, and Sucrose. If you aren't already aware, Mizuki got mega buffed when it comes to Stellar Swirl damage. They put some crazy Stellar Swirl multipliers in her passive, and she has become immediately one of the best, if not the best, animo DPSs in the game. So this is going to be a very fun team to try. Odette is obviously the best in slot in this team. And instead of Sucrose, you can also run C6 Farazan, which is cool. We also have Stellar Conduct with Sandrone and Yai, plus, you know, some other characters that have gotten the Stellar Conduct buffs. There's also Alyosha you can use, who is going to release alongside Odette. You have Diona, who got Stellar Conduct buffs. You have Chi-Chi, who got Stellar Conduct buffs. You have Beidou as well. I didn't put her here, but Beidou also got those buffs. Escoffier has proven herself to be quite valuable as like a last slot flex in these teams, just because she has a little bit of res shred and also does a pretty decent amount of personal damage herself. And then you have Nicole, and a lot of these Stellar Conduct teams benefit a lot from her team-wide attack buff. Let's say, for example, you're running a team with Sandrone, Yai, and Odette, and then you have Nicole, who's buffing the attack of all of them, right? Sandrone, Yai, and Odette, who all benefit very nicely from attack. This is where Nicole just like has a lot of value. She definitely works as a last slot in these teams as well. And then of course we have Risley and Sino teams, who are also some of the big winners of the Stellar Conduct buffs and also going to be pretty strong carries themselves. Them being strong stellar carries means that Odette is probably the best in slot on their team. And now we can talk about some future prospects for Odette, some future speculation. You know, will she hold up for the rest of Snezhnaya and whatnot? I wrote down that she could get outclassed in the future by dedicated supports, but I think it's very unlikely. Like, maybe she might get outclassed in like one team, but I think no matter what, probably by the end of Snezhnaya, Odette is most likely going to hold some spot in a meta team, probably multiple spots, but it's a little bit too hard to tell right now just because we haven't really seen the direction they've gone yet for these new stellar characters, so we'll ultimately just have to wait and see. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm curious to know what you think they're gonna do with Stellar Conduct characters in the future, and if you think Odette's gonna hold up. But yeah, this basically concludes my Odette guide. I hope it was informative. Let me know in the comments what teams you're gonna be looking out for or using with Odette. Also leave a comment if I missed anything or made any mistakes, any misinformation, whatever. Put it in the comments. I don't want to be spreading misinformation, so I will correct it in a pinned comment. Yeah, I wish us luck on our future Odette pulls. I'll be pulling her. If you made it this far into the video, you are a real one, and I will see you around. Bye bye.